The morning Joshua Blake disappeared started like any other Tuesday in Prescott, Arizona. The 28-year-old mechanic kissed his wife Lauren goodbye at their small ranch-style home on the edge of town, promised to pick up milk on the way back from work, and drove his weathered Ford pickup toward the auto shop where he'd worked for the past 6 years. The April sky stretched endlessly blue above the high desert landscape, and the temperature was already climbing towards 70 degrees by 8 in the morning. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers around the world. Joshua never made it to work that day. When his boss, Frank Delgado, called the house at 9:30 to ask where he was, Lauren felt the first flutter of genuine concern. Her husband was punctual to a fault, the kind of man who set his watch 5 minutes fast to ensure he'd never be late. She told Frank she'd check around and call him back. She tried Joshua's cell phone 6 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. By noon, Lauren was standing in the sheriff's office in downtown Prescott, filing a missing person report. Deputy Rebecca Ortiz took down the information with practiced efficiency, but Lauren could see the doubt in her eyes. Most missing adults turned up within 24 hours, usually with an embarrassing explanation. But Lauren knew her husband. Something was wrong. They found Joshua's truck 3 days later, parked at a trailhead 20 miles outside Prescott in the Prescott National Forest. The vehicle was unlocked, keys in the ignition, Joshua's wallet and cell phone on the passenger seat. His work boots sat neatly in the truck bed. Inside the cab, deputies found his jacket folded on the back seat. There was no note, no sign of struggle, nothing to suggest where he'd gone or why. The search began immediately. Volunteer teams combed the forest trails, while helicopters scanned the rugged terrain from above. Search and rescue dogs picked up Joshua's scent, leading away from the parking area, but the trail went cold after half a mile near a rocky outcropping. It was as if he'd simply vanished into the thin desert air. Lauren spent every day at the search command post, her face growing more drawn as hope slowly bled away. After 2 weeks, the official search was suspended. The volunteers went home. The news crews moved on to other stories, but Lauren refused to give up. She plastered missing person posters across 3 counties, organized her own search parties on weekends, and appeared on local news programs pleading for information. Joshua's parents drove up from Phoenix every weekend to help. His younger brother, Danny, took a leave of absence from his teaching job to coordinate volunteer efforts. The family's savings account dwindled as Lauren hired private investigators who turned up nothing but dead ends. The months crawled by with agonizing slowness. Spring turned to summer, and the Arizona heat became brutal. Lauren lay awake at night, torturing herself with possibilities. Had Joshua been injured, unable to call for help? Had someone taken him? Had he chosen to leave, to walk away from their life together? That last thought hurt the most, even though she knew it didn't fit the man she'd married. They'd been together since college, had weathered his father's death and her mother's cancer diagnosis. They were trying for a baby. Joshua had been excited about becoming a father. By August, the missing person posters had faded in the relentless sun. Some people in town whispered that maybe Joshua had run off, that maybe the marriage wasn't as solid as Lauren claimed. She felt their stares when she bought groceries, heard the conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Frank kept Joshua's job open for 3 months before finally, regretfully, hiring someone new. The auto shop held a fundraiser for Lauren, which she attended with hollow eyes and a forced smile. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn. Lauren had started seeing a therapist, trying to process her grief for a husband who might still be alive somewhere. She'd moved out of their bedroom, unable to sleep in the bed they'd shared. Joshua's clothes still hung in the closet. His toothbrush remained in the holder by the sink. The house had become a shrine to absence, every object a reminder of the void he'd left behind. The call came on a Wednesday morning in early October, exactly 6 months and 2 days after Joshua disappeared. Lauren was in her kitchen, mechanically eating toast she couldn't taste, when her cell phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered immediately. She answered every call, no matter what, just in case. "Mrs. Blake, this is Deputy Ortiz with the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office. We need you to come down to the station right away." Lauren's hands started shaking so violently she nearly dropped the phone. "Did you find him? Is he—" She couldn't finish the question. She wasn't sure which answer she was more afraid of hearing. "He's alive, Mrs. Blake. He's here. He's asking for you." Lauren made the 15-minute drive in 8 minutes, running 2 red lights and not caring. She burst through the sheriff's office doors wild-eyed and breathless. Deputy Ortiz was waiting for her in the lobby. The deputy's expression was strange, Lauren thought, confused and almost unsettled. "Where is he? What happened? Is he hurt?" The questions tumbled out in a rush. "He's in the conference room. Mrs. Blake, I need to prepare you. He seems physically fine, but—" Ortiz hesitated. "He's not saying much, and there's something unusual." But Lauren was already pushing past her, following the deputy's pointed finger down the hallway. She threw open the conference room door, and there he was, Joshua, sitting at the table, head in his hands, looking exactly as he had the morning he disappeared. Exactly. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. She'd imagined this reunion 1,000 times, but the reality froze her in place. Joshua looked up at the sound of the door, and his eyes met hers. They were filled with confusion and something that looked like fear. He stood slowly, and that's when Lauren noticed what Deputy Ortiz had meant. He was wearing the same clothes he'd left the house in 6 months ago. The same faded blue work shirt with Blake's Auto embroidered on the pocket, though the shop wasn't even his. The same dark jeans. The same grey t-shirt visible at the collar, and the clothes looked fresh, not faded by sun or worn by weather. No tears, no stains, no dirt. The shirt's blue was as vibrant as the day she'd washed it last April. His boots, which deputies had found in the truck bed, were now on his feet, the leather barely scuffed. "Joshua!" Her voice cracked on his name. "Lauren!" He said her name like he was testing it, making sure it was real. He took a step toward her, then stopped, uncertain. I can't explain." She closed the distance between them in 3 steps and wrapped her arms around him, and he felt solid and real and alive. She pressed her face against his chest and breathed him in. He smelled clean, like he'd just showered that morning. Not like someone who'd been missing for 6 months, not like someone who'd survived in the wilderness or been held captive. Just clean, normal, impossible. The investigation that followed was unlike anything Yavapai County law enforcement had ever conducted. Joshua was given a complete medical examination at Yavapai Regional Medical Center. The doctors found nothing wrong with him. His weight was exactly what it had been 6 months ago. His blood work was normal. He showed no signs of dehydration, malnutrition, or exposure to the elements. No injuries, no scars, no indication that he'd been harmed or held against his will. He was, by all medical measures, perfectly healthy. The problem was his memory, or rather the complete absence of it. Joshua could remember the morning he left for work. He remembered kissing Lauren goodbye, getting in his truck, heading down their street. And then nothing, a complete blank. The next thing he remembered, he said, was waking up on the side of Highway 89 about 5 miles outside Prescott at dawn. He'd flagged down a passing motorist who'd driven him to the sheriff's office. "I don't know where I've been," Joshua told the investigators, his voice thick with frustration. "I don't know what happened to those 6 months. It's just gone." The detectives assigned to the case ran every test they could think of. Joshua submitted to a polygraph examination. The results were inconclusive, the examiner noting that Joshua seemed genuinely confused by the questions. A forensic psychologist interviewed him for 3 hours, looking for signs of dissociative fugue state, amnesia, or psychological trauma. The psychologist's report noted that while Joshua's memory loss was genuine, the presentation was unusual. Most amnesia cases involved confusion about identity or difficulty forming new memories. Joshua knew exactly who he was and remembered everything up to the day he disappeared. It was only those 6 months that were missing. Lauren brought him home that first night, and they sat in their living room until 3 in the morning, talking in circles. Joshua looked around the house with something like wonder, touching familiar objects as if reacquainting himself with a life he'd forgotten. He noticed the missing person posters stacked on the kitchen counter. He saw the donation jar from the auto shop fundraiser. The weight of what his disappearance had done to her settled over him visibly. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry I can't tell you what happened." "It doesn't matter," Lauren told him, even though she knew it did. "You're home. That's what matters." But the questions wouldn't stop. And as word spread through Prescott that Joshua Blake had returned, the small town couldn't stop asking them either. The strangeness of Joshua's return became the only topic of conversation in Prescott. At the diner on Gurley Street, at the grocery store, at the gas station, people dissected every detail. How could someone disappear for 6 months and come back looking like only a day had passed? Where had he been? What had he been doing? And most importantly, why couldn't he remember? The theories started immediately. Some people suggested Joshua had been living rough in the desert, surviving on rainwater and what he could forage, though that didn't explain his pristine condition or his clothes. Others whispered about witness protection, about government conspiracies, about secret lives and hidden identities. The more religious residents of Prescott spoke in hushed tones about miracles and divine intervention. The younger crowd traded wilder theories about parallel dimensions and lost time. Lauren tried to ignore the gossip and focus on rebuilding their life. Joshua's old boss, Frank, offered him his job back without hesitation, which Joshua accepted gratefully. He needed routine, something to anchor him. His first day back at the shop was awkward. His co-workers didn't know how to act around him. They'd mourned him, accepted his loss, and now he was back, unchanged, as if death had rejected him and sent him home. Danny, Joshua's younger brother, visited almost every evening during the first 2 weeks. He'd been the one who'd refused to give up hope, who'd organized search parties when everyone else had moved on. Now he sat at their kitchen table, studying his brother with analytical intensity. Danny taught high school science, and his mind couldn't accept the impossibility of what had happened. "The clothes are the weirdest part," Danny said one evening, turning a beer bottle between his hands. 6 months of wear should show. Even if you'd been inside somewhere, protected from the elements, there'd be signs. Fabric breaks down, colors fade from body oils, from washing, but your shirt looks new. Joshua stared down at his hands. Since coming home, he'd stopped wearing that blue work shirt. It hung in the back of the closet now, and he couldn't explain why he didn't want to look at it. "I know. Believe me, I know how insane this all is." "I'm not saying you're lying," Danny said quickly. "I'm saying something happened to you that shouldn't be possible, and I want to help you figure out what." But as the weeks passed, no answers emerged. The sheriff's department investigated every lead, following up on reported sightings of Joshua from the past 6 months. None of them panned out. A man matching his description had been spotted at a gas station in Flagstaff in June, but security footage showed it was someone else. A woman in Phoenix claimed she'd seen Joshua at a homeless shelter in July, but the shelter's records didn't match. Every trail led nowhere. Lauren noticed changes in her husband that were subtle but unsettling. He'd always been an easy sleeper, but now he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night to find him standing at the bedroom window, looking out at their quiet street, with an expression she couldn't read. When she asked what he was thinking about, he'd say he didn't know, that he was just restless. He'd developed new habits, too. He started keeping detailed notes about his days in a small leather journal, recording what he did, where he went, who he talked to. When Lauren asked about it, he said he was afraid of losing time again, of having more months disappear into nothingness. The fear in his voice when he said it made her chest ache. Food tasted different to him now, he said. Not bad, just different, like his taste buds had been reset. He'd loved coffee before, drank 4 cups a day, but now it tasted bitter and wrong. He craved things he'd never particularly liked before. Oranges, yogurt, cold water with lemon. Lauren made mental notes of these changes, not sure what they meant or if they meant anything at all. The most disturbing change came 3 weeks after his return. Joshua woke up screaming in the middle of the night, thrashing against sheets soaked with sweat. Lauren grabbed him, calling his name until his eyes focused on her. He was shaking, gasping for breath, like he'd been running. "What did you dream about?" she asked gently, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "I don't know. I can't remember, but I was terrified." His voice was barely a whisper. "Lauren, what if I did something terrible? What if those 6 months are gone because I don't want to remember them?" "Don't think like that. The doctor said it could be trauma, that your brain might be protecting you from something overwhelming. Or, I'm protecting myself from something I'm ashamed of," Joshua said, and the self-loathing in his voice made her pull him closer. The breakthrough, when it came, was accidental. It happened 5 weeks after Joshua's return, on a Saturday afternoon. Danny had convinced Joshua to go hiking with him, to revisit the trailhead where the truck had been found. Lauren wasn't sure it was a good idea, but Joshua agreed, saying maybe being there would trigger something. They'd been walking for about an hour when Joshua stopped abruptly on the trail. Danny, walking a few paces ahead, turned back to find his brother standing completely still, staring at a rock formation off to the left. Joshua's face had gone pale. "Josh, you okay?" "I've been here before." Joshua's voice was strange, distant. "Not the day I disappeared. Recently. I've stood right here, right on this spot, and looked at those rocks." Danny's pulse quickened. "What else do you remember?" Joshua closed his eyes, concentrating. Images flickered at the edges of his mind, too fast to grasp. There were other people, not hikers. They were wearing... He shook his head in frustration. "It's gone. Whatever it was, it's gone again." But it was the first crack in the wall of his amnesia. That night, Joshua dreamed again, but this time when he woke, he remembered fragments. A room with white walls, the smell of antiseptic, voices speaking in low, urgent tones, and pain. Sharp, brief pain in his arm, like an injection. He told Lauren and Danny about the dream in the morning. Danny's expression grew thoughtful. "What if you weren't missing?" he said slowly. "What if you were somewhere specific, somewhere controlled? That would explain the clothes, the lack of wear, the maintained health." "Like where?" Lauren asked, though dread was already building in her stomach. "A medical facility, a hospital, a research institution." Danny pulled out his phone and started searching. "Josh, did you ever participate in any clinical trials, medical studies, anything like that?" Joshua thought back. "Yeah, actually, about 2 years ago. It was a sleep study at Northern Arizona University. I needed the money, and it was just a weekend. They monitored my sleep patterns, asked me questions, paid me $500. Danny's fingers flew over his phone screen. "Was it through the university's psychology department, or their medical research center?" "Medical research? Why?" "Because," Danny said, his voice tight, "there's a research facility affiliated with NAU about 30 miles from here. It's privately funded, does contract work for pharmaceutical companies. Clinical trials, behavioral studies, that kind of thing, and it's about 10 miles from where your truck was found." The three of them sat in silence, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Lauren spoke. "You think they took him? For 6 months? Why?" "I don't know, but it's the first thing that makes any sense. Josh, do you still have the paperwork from that sleep study?" Joshua nodded slowly. "It's in a box in the garage. I keep all that stuff for tax purposes." As they found the documents an hour later, the consent forms were thick, full of legal language that Joshua had skimmed but not carefully read 2 years ago. The study had been conducted by Desert Horizon Research Group, and buried in the fine print was a clause stating that participants might be contacted for follow-up studies. By signing, Joshua had agreed to be part of Desert Horizon's research pool. Danny photographed every page with his phone. Then they drove to the sheriff's office and showed everything to Deputy Ortiz. Her skepticism was evident at first, but as Danny walked her through the timeline and the proximity of the facility, her expression changed. She made some calls. Within 2 hours, a team of detectives was assembled. The investigation into Desert Horizon Research Group moved quickly once it began. The facility, it turned out, had a history of regulatory complaints. 3 years earlier, they'd been cited for violations of informed consent protocols in a drug trial. Last year, a participant in a cognitive enhancement study had filed a lawsuit claiming they'd experienced severe adverse effects that weren't disclosed in the consent forms. The lawsuit had been settled quietly out of court. When detectives showed up at the facility with a warrant, they found extensive records of Joshua's time there. He'd been part of an experimental program testing a new class of memory-suppressing drugs intended for trauma treatment. The researchers had been testing the drug's effectiveness at creating controlled, reversible amnesia. Participants were to be housed at the facility for 6 months while the drug's long-term effects were studied. At the end of the trial period, they'd be released with their memories restored. Except Joshua's memories hadn't been restored. The researchers had made an error in the dosage, creating a deeper amnesia than intended. Rather than face the consequences and potential lawsuits, they'd simply released him by the highway, betting that his missing time would be attributed to psychological trauma or a medical condition. They'd kept his clothes pristine, maintained his health, documented everything. They just hadn't counted on being discovered. The scandal exploded across northern Arizona. Desert Horizon's lead researcher, Dr. Nathan Vance, was arrested and charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and conducting unethical human experiments. 4 other researchers and 2 administrators faced similar charges. The facility was shut down, and federal investigators began reviewing all of their past studies. For Joshua, the revelation brought a strange mixture of relief and horror. Relief because there was finally an explanation, a rational reason for the impossible thing that had happened to him. Horror because his bodily autonomy had been violated, because 6 months of his life had been deliberately stolen, because people he'd trusted with his health had betrayed him so completely. The pharmaceutical company funding the research offered a settlement, 7 figures with an extensive confidentiality agreement attached. Joshua's lawyer told him to take it. Most people would have taken it, but Joshua wanted more than money. He wanted accountability. The trial was scheduled for the following spring. In the meantime, Joshua began the slow work of putting his life back together. He and Lauren started marriage counseling, addressing the trauma of his disappearance and the violation of his trust. He kept working at the auto shop, finding comfort in the familiar routine of engines and oil changes. He continued his nightly journaling, documenting not lost time but found moments, proof that he was present in his own life. Danny helped him file a civil suit against Desert Horizon, separate from the criminal charges. The evidence was overwhelming. The facility's own record showed that Joshua had never consented to the extended trial. that he'd been transported from the trailhead after being injected with a fast-acting sedative, that his truck had been carefully arranged to look like a voluntary abandonment. The defense lawyers tried to argue that Joshua had signed forms agreeing to follow up studies, but the consent language was too vague to justify what had been done to him. The memory-suppressing drug itself was unstable, the trial revealed. It had never been approved for testing in humans and was years away from any legitimate application. Doctor, Vance had falsified safety data and pressed ahead with human trials anyway, convinced he was on the verge of a breakthrough that would revolutionize trauma treatment. Joshua had been one of 12 people subjected to the 6-month trial. The others were located and brought forward. All of them had similar stories of missing time and pristine returns. In the end, Dr. Vance was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The other researchers received lighter sentences in exchange for testimony. The pharmaceutical company's settlement offer increased substantially once the full extent of the violations came to light. Joshua took the money this time after the confidentiality agreement was removed. He wanted people to know what had happened, wanted other victims of unethical research to come forward. The drugs eventually wore off, but Joshua's memories of those 6 months never fully returned. He got fragments sometimes, in dreams or in sudden flashes triggered by random stimuli. A smell of antiseptic would bring back an image of a white room. A certain tone of voice would remind him of instructions being given, but the details remained elusive, locked away by chemicals and time. Lauren asked him once if he wished he could remember. They were sitting on their back porch on a summer evening, a year after his return, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Joshua thought about the question for a long time before answering. "I used to think I did. I thought I needed those memories to feel whole again, but I don't think that's true anymore. Those 6 months were stolen from me, but they don't define me. This does." He gestured at the porch, at Lauren, at the life they were rebuilding together. "What we're doing right now, that's what matters." The missing person posters eventually came down. The whispers around Prescott faded as new gossip took their place. Life moved forward because that's what life does, regardless of the mysteries it contains. Joshua Blake's story became a cautionary tale about research ethics and corporate accountability. But for Joshua himself, it became something else. A reminder that even when time is stolen, what matters is how you spend the time that remains. 3 years after his disappearance, Lauren gave birth to their daughter. They named her Hope, because that's what had sustained them through the darkness. And when Hope was old enough to ask about the story of the time her father went missing, they told her the truth, that bad things happen sometimes, that people make terrible choices, but that justice and love and perseverance matter more than the gaps in our memories, that a person is more than their past, more than what was done to them, more than the time they lost. Joshua kept the blue work shirt he'd been wearing, the one that had defied 6 months of wear, but he never put it on again. It hung in the back of their closet, a physical reminder of the impossible thing that had happened. Sometimes Lauren would see him looking at it, his expression unreadable. She never asked what he was thinking. Some questions they'd learned didn't need answers. On the 6th anniversary of his disappearance, Joshua and Lauren drove out to the trailhead where his truck had been found. They hiked to the rock formation where he'd first remembered being there before, where the amnesia had first started to crack. They didn't talk much, just walked together through the high desert landscape, breathing the clean Arizona air. At the rock formation, Joshua stopped and looked out at the view. 6 years ago, he'd stood somewhere nearby, drugged and disoriented, being led away from his life. 6 years ago, his wife had been home, not yet knowing that he wouldn't return that night. 6 years ago, time had been stolen from him in a way he'd never fully recover, but he was still here, still standing, still moving forward. "Ready to head back?" Lauren asked, taking his hand. Joshua squeezed her fingers and smiled. The smile reached his eyes now, most of the time. The nightmares came less frequently. The fear of losing time again had faded to a manageable anxiety. He'd learned to live with the gaps, to accept that some parts of his story would remain blank pages. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready." They walked back down the trail together, their shadows long in the afternoon sun, leaving behind the place where he'd been taken and carrying forward the life they'd rebuilt from the pieces. The mystery of those 6 months would never be fully solved, not in the way mysteries are supposed to be. But Joshua Blake had learned something more important than answers. He'd learned that coming home wasn't about explaining where you'd been, it was about choosing to stay.